Hello everybody, Rackendar here, and welcome back to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links Beginner's Guide series. In this video, we are going to finally be covering that most important topic, the Beginner's Guide to Deck Building. Now this has been a long time coming. I know I've been kind of late on this, as my last Beginner's Guide video was a couple months ago, I'd say. And it was really difficult to find the time to record the video, try to figure out the best way to put the content forward. I experimented with a few video editing techniques to try and make that kind of happen, but unfortunately I'm just not there in terms of like my video editing skills. So I eventually just fell back into my old routine of using the Duel Links app to just kind of showcase my thoughts on whatever it is that I'm talking about at the time. So we'll go through a lot of things on here. I'll add and take away cards from various decks to kind of try to emphasize a certain point, and we'll just take a look at some of these ideas on the app. I do apologize. This will be a lengthier video because deck building is a lot of content. It is essentially your assessment of knowledge. It's your assessment of game knowledge. The more game knowledge you have, the better you will be at deck building, and in pretty much any card game that you play. It's just the nature of how it works, right? If you know how cards work, how the gameplay and stuff interact with each other, you'll be better at noticing those very important cards to put in decks and stuff like that. So this is going to be a rather lengthy video, as I try to kind of cover all of these various topics in great detail, at least as much detail as I can, but unfortunately this will require some effort on your part. If you want to get better at building decks and Duel Links, or even just getting better in general, you're going to have to play. The reason that most of my decks can come out so nicely, even for decks that I haven't looked into, is because I've played this game for over 1,500 hours. And that's no exaggeration. My Steam library hours is easily 1,400 already, with plenty of phone hours that isn't accounted for. So I've played quite a lot of this game. This is one of the games that I have invested a lot of time in as a content creator and a streamer. So I do have that game knowledge built up to help me know how to build these decks. And this doesn't just apply to net decking top tier decks, as we'll discuss here in a minute, because as you can see here, I'm going to use my Neo-Spatian deck as a great example for some of these ideas, because I think this will hit a lot of different aspects of the game all at once. So first things first is I did bring up net decking. I guess before I talk about net decking, I will preface this by saying most of my advice and ideas are going to be for building consistent top tier decks. Even if you're playing a low tier deck like Neo-Spatians, it's all about consistency and like building them to be as competitive as they can possibly be without expecting too much from the deck. Neo-Spatians aren't top tier, and they probably won't be for a while, but I can still build a really competitive deck out of them, as I've done here. So without further ado, let's kind of talk about some of these ideas. First, with net decking. If you're unfamiliar with the term, net decking is the act of going onto the internets and taking other people's deck ideas for your own. The biggest thing that I want people to get out of this is don't feel bad about net decking. Information is the key to like everything. Knowing things is never a bad thing, and knowing card information and knowing that a deck does actually work is never a bad thing. You still have to know what the cards do and know how to play them to even climb. That's why there are top players still. And so net decking is just a tool that we can use to help improve our decks. Maybe we want to tweak it to better suit our playstyle, or tweak it to be more competitive with certain card choices. But we can use a lot from these net decking, or from net decking itself. And I don't think that we should ever be discouraged from using the internet to its fullest advantage. Any kind of other field would do so. You don't, like, scientists don't get onto each other for uh, relying on information that the internet provides, right? They embrace it. If scientist A has something he needs from scientist B, he goes over there, he gets that information, uses those results and data in order to do that. Mathematicians, they'll look up equations. The information age is here, and it doesn't have to exclude gamers for some weird reason. So feel free, go onto the internet, look at decks, and then play them. Play these decks, even if you've never played the deck before, even if you've never even if you're you don't know what the cards do. Just jump into a game and play the game. That's the best way to get better at the game, is to just continuously play it. That's how I do it. I've played Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG like a couple of times before I played Duel Links. What did I do? I watched people play. I looked at their decks. I understood why they play. And a lot of content creators and personalities will even provide insight and advice as to and information as to why they chose specific cards. I do it from a lot of my videos. I know I've watched some of Guns Blazing's, and he does it too for some of his deck lists, even some of his troll decks where he's or meme decks where he's just kind of having fun and not really playing it to climb a ladder or be competitive, super competitive. He'll still give you guys that information, and it's never a bad thing to go in, look at the deck list, look at the cards, have an idea of what the deck does from the content creator, or just by knowing what the cards yourself, and then going from there. Even if you keep the same exact deck because you think it's amazing, that's fine. That's good. That means both of you are understand the game and are able to make that consensus amongst yourselves. And so don't ever feel bad about net decking. It's a stepping stone to becoming better at the game, and that's always a good thing. It makes the game more accessible. It makes everything nicer and much smoother. Next, I want to talk about consistency, because basically consistency is king in any kind of random game. A game of random nature, right? Card games being insanely popular, even though that they are random, right? You don't always get the combos that you need. Like, I'm not going to draw Neos and Miracle Contact and Contact Out and Air Hummingbird and Aqua Dolphin all every single time, right? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. So if I go second, right, that's not going to be my 5-card opening hand every single time. And that's fine. Like, that's the way that this works. There's going to be there are elements of randomness in a card game, and basically what our goal is as deck builders is to make the most consistent deck we can out of what we are provided. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is not going over the minimum deck amount. And so, for example, in Duel Links, the main deck does have a requirement of being 20 cards. You cannot have less than 20 cards in your main deck. In Yu-Gi-Oh! In the TCG, TCG standing for trading card game, if you're unaware, in the normal Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, it's a 40 card deck limit, and so in that situation you wouldn't go over 40 cards or under, because you're not allowed, but you wouldn't go over 40 cards. And in Duel Links, similarly, you don't go over the 20 card minimum. In pretty much every card game out there, you do not go over the minimum cards. And that's to improve and make sure that the deck stays as consistent as it possibly can. And that's just pretty much how it works. You got to work with the minimums, and there are some exceptions to this rule. Don't get me wrong. Spellbooks do run 30 cards right now as their best deck, but the exceptions to these rules are usually kind of strange in the way that they are able to make that work. Spellbooks have a lot of consistency in their search power, so that's one of the ways that they make that work. But I won't go into too much detail, as that's better suited for a deck guide, right? One of the other takeaways that you can have is, if you're looking up net decks, look up a guide for the deck. There's several of them out there. There's lots of resources available to you. If you want to learn why these decks that are top tier work, go read a guide about them. I mean, you're gonna have to put your own work in reading the guide, but that's how you get better. That's how we improve as people in any field, in any practice. How do you get better at being a dentist? You go to school to be a dentist. I mean, nobody wants to be a dentist, let's be real here, but how do you get better at football? You play football, you learn football. How do you get better at building, at being a scientist, research? You go to the school, you take classes to get better and read. That's pretty much how it's going to work with anything else. If you want to get good at it, you have to put your time into it. And even if you're not looking to be a top tier player, you can still make these small adjustments to improve, just to have fun in making more casually themed decks. And that's something I can do as well. I've done this here with Neospatians. I have a really big love for the Neospatian archetype. I think they're really cool. I'm a little sad that they're not as powerful as I'd like them to be, but I still enjoy making a fun deck from time to time. So yeah, 20 card minimum. Do not be kind of fooled into trying to build a bigger deck. Like, let's say you want, you're looking into Neospatians. Well, you want, I don't know, 2 of this guy because he's a big dude. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to kind of fool yourself into building a bigger deck than the 20 card minimum. But don't let that get to you. You have 20 cards. You can make that work. Trust me. A lot of people do. 21 and 22 cards, like, sometimes that's okay, but like I said, most of those are exceptions, with various reasonings for why those are exceptions. And I don't want to get too far into these different exceptions, because there's other videos and resources that are better suited to explaining why those exceptions exist. I don't want to dedicate entire sections of this video to that stuff, since we are just trying to focus on the generalities. So again, 20 card minimum. The other way that we maintain consistency is through multiple copies of single cards, right? If I run 3 out of 20 cards of Miracle Contact, the chances that I pick up Miracle Contact are going to be higher. And that is true for any card, right? If I had a 3rd copy of Dark World Dealings, I would run my 3rd copy of Dark World Dealings. And that's just pretty much how it's going to work for any deck. I do the same for Neos and stuff like that. And these ratios can be adjusted and changed based on what you're trying to do with the deck, right? So the reason that you see more Cross Porter than you do Hummingbird or Aqua Dolphin is because he has a way of searching them, meaning he can add them from my deck to my hand. And so there's a lot of intricacies with search power and how the ratios are adjusted to accommodate for search power versus the card you're searching for. Like I said, game knowledge. It's a lot out there, and it can be a lot to take in, trust me, but there are resources to smooth out this process, and I hope that this video can be one of the major ones, because I do want to get more people involved in the community, and I do want people to try to have a good time with the game. So but essentially 3 cards of, if you want to see that card, Miracle Contact, for example, is one of the main ways that this deck works. So you need 3 copies of it. You want 3 copies of this card in order to make it even viable. Similarly, Contact Out is another main component of the deck. This is a card that you want to see. This is a combo card that you want to see in order to win those duels. So in order to more consistently obtain that card, we stack the deck with 3 of them. 3 cards is the card limit for Yu-Gi-Oh, so you can only run 3 copies, with the exceptions of some of the limited cards. For example, we just had some of the Sylvan cards be limited. So as you can see, there's a 2 right here on the Rose Lover. That means you can only have 2 of the Rose Lover in your deck. And there's a little, the way that they rule the limited stuff, you can only have 2 semi-limited cards in your, only 2 semi-limited cards may be included. And the way that that works is you can have 2 of these, 2 of these, or 1 of each. And there's a lot of cards on the list now, so you'll have to keep, like, that's another part, you'll have to keep track of the changes in the game. And that's why just net decking all the time isn't always the best, because you may be looking at a deck from, you know, months ago that's out of date. For example, the Sylvan deck that this is kind of based off of doesn't work anymore because they've changed the game. They've made changes to make the Sylvan deck not as strong as it used to be, and so now you can't as reasonably use that guide back in the that I made in order to, you know, play the deck, because now you can't run 3 copies of this card that I used to run back in the day. So, you know, there's a lot of intricacies to the idea of deck building, and again, it's all about that game knowledge. So that's enough of talking about some of that. Back to the consistency point. 3 copies of each card that you really want to see, right? I really want to see this card. I really want to see this card. I don't super want to see this card, but there's a lot of ways to play. Like, I do want to see this card as well to search out my other cards. I do want to see this card. I'd play 3 of him if I had him as well in this deck. And I would run 3 of this as well. These are your main, like, combo pieces and, like, effects that search and other things like that. And those are the things that you'll want to see when you're playing the deck. So you're gonna stack the deck to make it happen more often. And that's kind of a cool little thing with card games. We're essentially manipulating the RNG, right? Card games are RNG, and in order to consistently, you know, in order to play them very, you know, competitively, we have to kind of manipulate that RNG. We have to stack our deck in certain ways. Well, not stack that's cheating, but, like, you know, we have to build our deck in certain ways in order to make sure that the possibilities are in our favor. The statistics are in our favor, right? Statistically speaking, we have a 3 in 20 chance of pulling out Miracle Contact within our first 5 cards. It's actually a little higher than that because of the way, you know, probability works. And so we're stacking that probability in our favor in order to hopefully draw these combo pieces more effectively. And that's how all of these decks are going to function. You're trying to stack this, you're trying to make them as consistent as possible in order to have those combo pieces available to you as fast as possible. And so for a deck like this is a really good example. I don't want you guys to get kind of baited into this. I've seen this happen in a lot of beginner decks. They see a lot of different cards that they want in their deck that have different effects. So for example, for Neospatians, I've seen where they would run, like, let's say they have other Neospatians, right? They're going to be playing, you know, all these cards, but then, oh, maybe, I don't know, let's throw in a Blaze Man because he kind of seems cool, right? He synergizes with this build. Oh, we do want to see Elemental Hero, right? So let's, I don't know, maybe Phantom Magician. I guess that doesn't work. So let's try. Oh, this synergizes with Neos. Let's throw this in our deck, right? We don't need all 3 copies. Oh, well, we'll play the 3 copies of this. Let's see. What more do we need? Oh, this is Neos, right? This is a cool little Gemini monster. Let's throw a couple of him in here. Oh, this guy will summon Neos, right? Let's throw him in here. Elemental Heat doesn't really help us here because we're trying to build Neospatians. I guess I should, you know, kind of clarify that point. You know, we're trying to do that. Let's see what this card does. Oh, here we go. Neospatian Aqua Dolphin. We also have there's other Neospatians. Where are my other Neospatians at? Can you please provide to me my other Neospatians? Here we go. Related cards. We don't have Black Panther, so I can't actually. Oh, we do. There we go, Dark Panther. Let's throw in Dark Panther, right? That's another Neospatian card. We want to get as much value out of the Neospatians as possible. And then we have Shining Flare Wingman. We're not playing that kind of deck, but maybe it's cool. We'll throw that in there as well. Throw in the Shining Flare Wingman. I actually want to build a deck around that card pretty soon. Anyway, we'll throw that in. Let's see, more related cards. Where's Glowmoss? Where's Glowmoss? Let me find Glowmoss. Give me Glowmoss. Why is Glowmoss not here? There we go. Glowmoss, right? We have another Neos card. So look at this, right? We got a lot of Neos cards here now. We got, we got one of each, so we'll have a high chance at getting all these combos that we want. That's not how this works, unfortunately, right? If you only have one of each, then your consistency at playing them is going to drop significantly. Like if you're just running a plethora of like multiple cards, right? Like this happens, they see the blue eyes, they want, I want blue eyes in my deck. Ooh, I want Dark Magician in my deck. Ooh, I want Dark Magician Girl in my deck. Jinzo's a thing. Let's play Jinzo. Like all of these exciting cards, like don't get me wrong, like they're exciting. I really like them, but like all of these different like having them all in your deck, especially as one-ofs, like that just it plummets the consistency, right? Because you could be wanting to draw Hummingbird, but then you draw your Neo Glowmoss or your Dark Panther, right? Let's say you have Miracle Contact out, Aqua Dolphin, and Neos. That's 4 out of the 5 pieces, but all of a sudden you drew your Glowmoss. Well, if this Glowmoss happened to be a second Hummingbird or one of these cross porters, you could have figured out a way in order to, get those extra combo pieces into your hand in some way, because now you would be consistently, more consistently opening up into those combo pieces. Or, for example, if you don't have Neos in your graveyard, so Oversoul becomes essentially a dead card in your hand because you can't play it. You can't do anything to it until Neos is in your graveyard because you don't run anything else that, synergizes with this specific card. So just running these kind of random one-off cards in your decks, that's not how that you want to build it. You want to take a close look at your deck and figure out what kind of deck am I running. Am I running a lot of traps? Am I running a lot of spells? How does those synergize? Am I running a lot of, things, you just kind of have to think about your deck. So let's build this from the scratch, right? This will be my example deck. This is a Neospatian deck that I will try to walk through the building of with you, and I hope that this works. The first thing that you want to do as a player is take advantage of the net deck. And so the net deck that I saw has 3 of this. So the first thing that you would want to do is you would want to go to the internet and you would want to check out a net deck, right? I'm not going to do that right now because I know what I kind of know what the deck is I'm going to build. So you would check out the net deck and then you'd see what those cards are, right? You just take a glance. Don't copy it immediately. Just take a glance. And then secondly, after you've looked at the net deck, you kind of get an idea of what cards you can look for. Now you figure out what is your archetype and what cards support that archetype, right? And it's a really specific thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's one of the reasons why building Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks is so difficult, is because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't follow kind of generic rule sets that, say, maybe Magic does. Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually kind of has its own little special cases because there's archetypes. All of the cards do some insane effects sometimes, and they have, you have cards that can support the archetype, cards that can just protect your monsters that are generic for any deck. You have things like that, and so it can be a really difficult thing to try and figure this out, which is one of the reasons that I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is specifically great for having net decks evolved. Right, so first of all, we want to build Neospatians. So this is a very different archetype than regular Neos. or like elemental heroes, we just want to we want to focus on the Neospatians. This is something that Jaden doesn't even do in his anime, but because he has anime protagonist powers to top deck everything he needs, he doesn't feel the side effects of playing two different archetypes in one deck. Because Jaden actually plays both Spatians and elemental heroes, which is not something you want to do. Do not play that type. Do not play that way. It's normally exceptionally bad. With I don't even know of a case that it's not off the top of my head. Because playing the two different archetypes, well, what if you draw a Neospatian support card while having 4 elemental heroes in your hand? Well, you're kind of screwed, right? So I wouldn't do that. Don't do that unless you know that the archetypes can kind of mix and mingle. And for example, Vision heroes can mix with Destiny heroes a little bit, with Masked heroes, right? Like there's a little bit of synergies with that in the way that they play out. So you can kind of mix and match there. But that's, like I said, looking at the exceptions separately is a lot better than trying to focus on them in this video. So let's try to run through this. We know that we want to play elemental heroes, or Neospatians. So the first thing that we want to do, we want to pick out our core cards. And we're going to focus our deck around a specific win strategy. And that's something that you're going to have to figure out with your deck. A lot of the top tier decks have very diverse win strategies. For example, spellbooks, they can, play it slow and, just kind of wear you down with their resources because you run out of resources. Or they can get a big monster to the, a lot of big monsters to the field and just like overwhelm you with a lot of firepower. So there's a lot, like most of the top tier decks, they're really good because they're consistent and they have a lot of win conditions available to them. So playing Neospatians, one of the best win conditions that I have found as playing the game as long as I did is through the elemental hero Storm Neos. Basically, this card requires 3 cards to fuse: Neospatian Air Hummingbird, Neospatian Aqua Dolphin, and elemental hero Neos himself. You summon him through 2 different means. One being that they're all on the field, and then you can special summon him by shuffling him into the deck. Or you can use Miracle Contact. This is a special support card that we'll talk about as we build the deck. And his effect is once per turn, you can destroy all spell and trap cards on the field. Just simple. Destroy them all. And then he also synergizes with another card as well that we'll talk about. So we know we want him. He plays really well into board clear and then OTK. This is our win condition, elemental hero Storm Neos. Now you may be fooled into being like, oh well, if we want Storm Neos as our win condition, we want to play some cards that help play that. So we would want to play Neospace, which lets him stay on the field and buffs his attack and stuff like that. The way that we're going to build the deck is we're going to say we want OTK. So in order to play this deck OTK, we have to play this card called Contact Out. Now this is something that you eventually learn. This was in the net deck, right? So in the net deck, you would see that instead of playing Neospace, the top player is playing Contact Out. And you would say, oh, I wonder why. So let's talk about it. Return 1 Neospatian fusion monster Neos fusion monster you control to the extra deck. And then if all of the monsters listed on that fusion are in your deck, special summon them. So essentially, you target this guy and then special summon Neos, Air Hummingbird, and Aqua Dolphin. And you can do this as many times. There's no once per turn limit on this or on your Miracle Contact. So you can do a lot of combos that usually end in OTK. So this is a really good effect, really strong way of like clearing the board and then going into a strong just field destruction. So in the net deck, you would notice this and you would say, okay, we have a couple support cards and we know what our win condition is. Well, let's start building our deck finally. So what we need is we definitely need the cards listed on this guy, right? So we need our Neos, we need our Air Hummingbird, and we need our Aqua Dolphin. Now I'm not going to put both of these in the like multiple copies in the deck right away. So we're going to take those, right? Well, what do you want to do? So Neos is the core to pretty much all the Neospatians, so we want to put the max copy of Neos in as possible. Additionally, the cards do not work without Miracle Contact. This is literally like how the deck's played, so we do need 3 of these. And you can kind of, visualize this as you're playing and as you see the net deck on your side and just be like, okay, this card cannot be replaced by anything. There's really no other way around it. Let's go ahead and try to, put 3 of these in. This is one of the best cards for the elemental or for the Neospatians supports, right? So you have these 3 cards. You know that you're playing this card. You can even kind of have a middle ground, right, where you say, okay, we're playing these 3. What are my support cards, right? My support cards are, Miracle Contact, Neo Space. Some of these cards can, they're considered support cards. They're not support cards for Neospatian specifically, but they can maybe find a weird role. Righteous Justice kind of works with the deck. Contact Out is specifically for Neos fusions, so this is a support card as well. So you can kind of see where we're going with this, right? We start with the support cards. And right now we can, as you're looking through, you can see Miracle Contact. Basically, this is a polymerization for Neos fusions, because otherwise they all have to be on the field, which is really hard to do. So having this for the Neos fusions, just like, okay, this is a card that we want in our deck. This is a support card that we're going to want in our deck. So let's put all 3 of these in our deck. So then we can kind of go from here, right? So what are the other support cards that are available to us? We can click on Neos, and unfortunately it's going to show up a lot of like different fusions. This one can kind of, okay, let's throw this guy in here, right? He's a support card. He does very similar things, and he can become Elemental Hero Neos, right? So that's good, right? So we'll throw him in here, and we'll try to figure out how we want to play this. And so this is kind of how you start building your deck, right? Eventually you just, this just becomes all memory, right? You remember the cards, you remember what you want, and you just know, okay, well, blah, 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 we're going to throw 3 of these in here. But at first, you're going to have to think about it. Like, you're going to, figure out what you're trying to do and go from there, right? So, related cards. Cross Porter is another support card for the archetype. Send 1 monster you control to the graveyard, special summon 1 Neospatian. When this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Neospatian monster from your deck to your hand. Oh, that sounds really good, right? So, Search. Search power is amazing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Any card game, actually. Being able to search your deck for cards that you want/need is amazing, right? So immediately we can look at this and be like, he's a searcher. This is how we are searching our deck. We want 3 of him in here for sure. He's how we're going to add Neospatian or Air Hummingbird and Aqua Dolphin. So we're going to run 3 of him. And then you can kind of see, well, we're probably going to want 2 at least of these. And then you can see, oh, we're already approaching our monster limit, right? So most of the time, you're going to want a 50-50 ratio between monsters and spells and trap. This varies from deck to deck, mostly, or, this does vary from deck to deck a little bit more than, say, the 20-card limit rule. But for the most part, a 50-50 ratio is a reasonable ratio to go by. So we have our 50-50 ratio, right? Okay, well, this looks pretty good, right? We have our 2, Spatian monsters. We have a Neos Alias, which can, maybe contact out some way. We also have Cross Porter to search our Neospatians. But, all right, what else are we looking for? Well, the net deck will show that we're playing this card, Beginning of Heaven and Earth. And then this kind of, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this card misses timing because it says when sent to the graveyard, not if. So this is where some game knowledge comes into play. You can play around this. This one plays around that timing. If you send Cross Porter to the graveyard using Beginning of Heaven and Earth, he doesn't miss his timing. And additionally, Dark World Dealings doesn't miss his timing either. So I don't want to get too much detail there because, again, this is supposed to be a deck building guide, not like, I don't want to go into details about all of these mechanics that exist in Yu-Gi-Oh, because there's a lot of them that I could cover. So for now, we have our core here, right? We have a really solid deck. This could work. So now you have to choose. Are there more support cards that I could find? Or do I find more generic cards that can work with this deck, right? So we kind of look through. I like looking through my ultra rares. I filter through. I tend to filter my card catalog through rarity, because most of the time the ultra rares are the best. Not always, but most. And then you also have a favorites thing, and then you can also look at popular cards. This is a new feature that they just added, and you can kind of look through here, be like, oh, Chalice is decent. Maybe I want some protection. Like if you look at these guys, 600 attack, 800 attack. Maybe it would be worth putting in Wall of Disruption and Treacherous Trap Hole. So we don't want both because of the way Treacherous works, but you get the idea. Maybe some Super Rush. In order to help, maybe this guy, because he also protects them. Maybe 2 econs, right? So here you go. This is the way that you would build it if you're looking at some generic cards. Right now, there's no way to keep this guy on the field. This guy gets shuffled into the deck during the end phase, so it's a little bit iffy. So at this point, you can be like, well, my deck's kind of struggling a little bit. It's useful, but I really don't have that pizzazz. My win condition is strong, but I just don't have that pizzazz. So then you go back to the net deck, realize that he's not playing any of these cards, and you kind of question why. Well, he's playing 3 Contact Out. What does Contact Out do? Oh, returns fusion to the extra deck and brings the fusion materials back out. Oh, that's really cool. Neos is a 2500 attack monster. So this can kind of lead to some OTKs. It also prevents me from losing all of my monsters when he gets sent to the graveyard when he gets returned during the end phase, which is one of the big downsides of Neospatian monsters like this, or like the Neos fusions like this. So a little bit of a downside there. So now we have even more cards, right? We have a more core deck, and this is kind of where like a top. And then you can look at Dark World Dealings, and you can say, oh, this is draw. This card draws from my deck, right? That's really good. And then if you start with this card, he doesn't miss timing. So you can kind of be like, oh, not only will this draw me a card, it could potentially search me a card. There's a really cool term that a lot of people use. Deck thinning is deck winning. Again, we are playing with RNG/probability here. So what's the best way to make things happen? Thin out your deck of cards you don't want in there anymore, right? So he's going to draw you a card, and he's going to bring out your monster, right? So if you didn't draw Contact Out, you just increased your chances of drawing it next turn by a lot, because now you have less cards in your deck. So that's really, like, being able to do that, that's really good. So this is a lot of synergy. Dark World Dealings. So let's put in 2 of them. Wish we had 3, but we don't. And then how else would we thin our deck? Well, we know that this is a warrior monster, because you can see it down there. So what else can we do? And then you take your final glance to the net deck and realize that they're playing Beginning of Heaven and Earth alongside of Gaia. So we'll keep this guy in here. And you'll realize, okay, Swift Gaia. If this is the only card in your hand, you can normal summon it without tributing. That's a really good effect right there. Because we're playing a combo deck, we could very much get rid of all of these cards. So let's put this guy in here. That's sweet. And he's also playing this. What does he do? Lets you pick 3 and send them to the graveyard. It has to include this, so we can't play these 2 without them in the deck with each other. But this is a really good way of sending stuff to the graveyard, because this guy works from hand, field, or graveyard. So you can just like, oh, there's a lot of synergy here. And then it also kind of, it doesn't miss the timing of Cross Porter. So you can actually send Cross Porter to the graveyard with this, search out a Hummingbird, have this set as well, and then bam, you just like instantly, like you can just kind of feel the synergy of your deck coming to life. Okay, so now we have this, right? This is our build. We have 21 cards. We could play 21 cards, but let's kind of think about it. if you look at this guy, he doesn't really benefit our deck at the moment because we're playing around the synergy of this card with the rest of our deck and getting out our combos immediately because of it. So, okay. He does become Elemental Hero, but this requires 2 summons, right? You have to summon him, and then you have to normal summon him again to get this Gemini effect. So you have to protect him for 2 turns, and then additionally, you might not even get the rest of your Neospatians on the field in order to get a true contact fusion off. So you're just kind of like, well, I don't know, he might not be what I need. Let's get rid of him. And then bam, now you have the deck that I came up with, right? You have a dex, you have a draw, you have a draw card, you have some search cards, you have another way of thinning out your deck with this card, and then you have your combo pieces, which are the Neospatians and these 2 cards right here. And that's how it works. So basically, grab a net deck, look through the cards, and then, it kind of goes in order. What's my archetype? What are the support cards for my archetype, right? So here's a great example. This is a support card for Elemental Hero Fusion monsters. This is not a support card. This is just a generic card that does something for our deck. So for another good example, Widespread Ruin versus Contact Out. Okay, never mind. Let's do Econ. Econ versus Contact Out. Contact Out is a support card for Neospatians and Neos Fusions. Econ is just an enemy controller. Econ is just a generic card that can work in pretty much any deck because it doesn't have a specific effect tied to an archetype. It works with everything. This Contact Out only works with our deck because we're playing Neos Fusions. So that's where you get that idea from. So from there, right? Pick your archetype. What is it? Pick your figure out your support cards. Right, I guess first. So after you pick your archetype, figure out your win condition with that archetype, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to use Elemental Hero Storm Neos in combination with Contact Out for OTK. This is our win condition. Now, this can vary, and this can also vary for the archetype, right? We could have built this deck completely differently using Neospace, right? We could play this deck using Neospace and trying to build a deck that relies on Storm Neos staying on the field. But we decided, based off of what we wanted to do, as well as our net deck, to do it like this, where we played it around this OTK power of Storm Neos and Contact Out. So you kind of have to make those decisions, figure out what your win condition is with your archetype. There's lots of deck, like I said, there's lots of resources out there on the internet. Go figure them out. What kind of net deck do you want? What kind of, power do you need? And just keep going, right? Do I want to look up a deck that uses Neospace? Or do I want to look up a deck that just kind of figures out a way around that downside of shuffling into the end extra deck during the end phase, right? That's what this deck does. Contact Out allows you to avoid the end phase drawbacks, and it's really good. So being able to figure that out, that's the first step. What is your archetype and which win condition / what win condition are you playing around, right? So spellbooks is an archetype, and then the win condition of board swarm or kind of resource removal from your opponent. That win condition part can vary a lot, but that's the other step. Your third step, what are my archetype support cards? What kind of cards supports the archetype specifically? For Neospatians, it's these 2 cards, Contact Out, Miracle Contact, and then Cross Porter as well. So these archetype cards support Neospatians. And then, for example, if you're playing, let's go ahead to a different one. Destiny Heroes. Or Elemental Heroes, right? So Elemental Heroes, Elemental Hero Ocean is a support card for elemental heroes, and then Righteous Justice is a support card that removes spell and traps because it, elemental hero. And then Destiny Hero Decider is a pretty interesting card because it's an any hero monster support card because it works with pretty much any hero. And so you kind of get these interesting effects. Elemental Hero Heat has his own effects with elemental heroes, and so Righteous Justice is the support card here. And then here's a Destiny Hero deck, right? So what are my support cards? Dreamer's my support card. Destiny Draw, right? Discard a Destiny Hero, draw 2 cards. This is a support card. Masked Hero, Mask Change is like the support cards for Masked Heroes. So these are like Masked Heroes are a little bit weird, but they're really cool. So those are my support cards. So that's kind of what you got to do. Again, to iterate, pick an archetype. What is my win condition? What are my support cards? And then what are my generic cards that need to be added to the deck? And then from there, the 5th step is ratios. The ratio part is an extremely difficult one, as we kind of went over. So we'll jump back in and make a little bit more. But anyway, so like the what are my generic cards, right? So if I wasn't playing around this specific archetype, Wall of Disruption is a generic card to protect my monsters. What are my generic traps, spells and traps? Powerful Rebirth is a generic trap card that revives a monster from the graveyard. Treacherous Trap Hole is a generic trap card that kills 2 monsters. These are your generic spells and traps, right? Dark Core is a generic spell card that banishes a face-up monster. Gyoku, or this ain't a generic one. That's so bad. Cosmic Cyclone, generic spell card that just banishes a spell or trap on the field. These are the cards you have to. These are the cards you look for after you've picked out your core. After you've picked out the core support cards that go with yours. And don't get me wrong. So support cards can also be bad. Like you can have bad support cards for your decks. Actually, most people think this is a bad support card, to be honest, because it really does. It doesn't really help too much, and it requires the monster on the field in the first place. But there are, most of the time, like you could play around this and make a cool and interesting deck. But like, for example, the new Fur Hires. Really? That's not how that works? Okay. Let's just do this. Here we go. So, training for hire for all your training needs, because Konami are having a blast naming their cards. This is a pretty bad support card, actually, because the deck doesn't need it, and then it could be replaced by a more generic trap card that does better things than this support card. All this does is summon monsters from your deck whose level is lower than one of the monsters that you had dies. So, like, first of all, the effect requires such a strict activation in which your monster has to die. Next, it doesn't even do anything like super great for you when it does die. All it does is bring out another monster, which is usually weaker because it does have that requirement that the level is lower. So you can kind of see it's a really difficult card to kind of justify, because it requires a monster on your field to die, and then it doesn't like give you anything really much better in return. It could bring you out a weaker monster that you don't even want on the field. Whereas opposed to, say, if you replace this card with a Wall of Disruption, you're protecting the monster so it doesn't have to die, and then you can play around whatever you have on the field. Or you can, I mean, I know it kind of searches the deck, and I was talking about deck thinning is deck winning and stuff like that, but you can play around that, and then there's other for hire support cards that do that job better. So it's like I said, it's a very tricky thing. It's a very game knowledge-y thing. Like, you need to it's an assessment of your game knowledge, and the more that you learn, the more that you'll realize that some cards are just strictly weaker than others. Some cards are insanely good. Some cards that normally are really bad would end up sounding amazing now. I get Destiny Hero Militias is a good example. 6-star monster with 800 attack. Well, that's really crap, right? Well, it turns out his summoning effect is such an insanely good tool for the deck that it actually ends up being a really strong card. So there's like a lot of these types of things that you have to look out for. Again, what is your archetype? What is your win condition? What are the good archetype support cards? What are the generic support cards that you can do or put in to protect or however? And then from there, the ratios. And one of the best ways to figure these things out is to just net deck. Look at the decks that you see on the internet. Listen to the personalities explaining those decks. If Guns Blazing showed you a new deck for the first hires, what is his explanation? Why is he choosing these cards? He sometimes, a lot of these personalities will do that. So just kind of jump in, figure out what those cards do. Look at them yourself. Don't just copy paste and then play. Or I mean, you can do that. I'm not saying don't do that. Sometimes that's really good. Maybe you just copy paste and play, and then while you're playing, you figure out why the cards work. So that's another good thing that you can do. But read them a little bit. If you've played the game for for a little while, start reading them, and then you can start building that up, because that's how that's how you get better at it. You got to work at it, and you got to realize, and then eventually you'll start realizing when certain cards have synergies. You'll realize that the whole mistiming thing with when and if statements after you've played the game for a while, you'll start to realize, Dark World Kneelings and this, they don't actually miss that timing. So I can actually use them in this deck to make this cross porter effect work somehow. And that's pretty cool. So like I said, I apologize for it being a lengthy video. Like I said, information is key. You can learn that, right? So I think the deck that I took this from, I actually did net deck this, it had 3 Neos, it had 3 Dark World Dealings, 3 Beginning of Heaven and Earth, or no, it didn't have Dark World Dealings because it came out before Dark World Dealings. It had 2 Gaias, and it had 11 monsters, and 3 of these, and it had 3, 3, 3. Right? But I came in here and I said, well, I don't have 2 copies of Gaia. I do now. I actually ended up getting another one. But I don't have 2 copies of Gaia. I don't want to use 3 of these without 2 copies of Gaia, because in order to use these cards, you have to use Gaia. So I was like, okay, let's try Dark World Dealings instead. And it ended up working out pretty decently. So this is the deck that I was using for a while. To play some fun on the ladder with Neospatians. Neospatians aren't the best, but you can still build this really fun, consistent deck. And so learning how to improve that consistency, learning how to maximize the ratios in order to better improve your chances of drawing the important combo pieces you need to win those duels. That's something that that'll eventually come to you. And trust me, it doesn't take as long as it sounds. I know I said I've been playing for thousands of hours, but you'll pick it up pretty quickly, I believe. And you just kind of have to do some of your research. If you see a deck if you see decks that you enjoy, read up on them, play them, and eventually you'll start picking up on the techniques. So one more time to reiterate, what is your archetype? What is its win condition? What are your support cards? And what are your generic cards? And then from there you go into ratios. If your support cards are really godlike, like Miracle Contact, put all 3 of them in. If they're maybe a little bit weaker, then maybe you don't need all 3 copies and you need 2, so that you can fit in another generic card, such as maybe Powerful Rebirth or Wall of Disruption. So I really hope that this helped you guys out. Again, this is a ton of content, and I really do apologize for the length of the video. So I really wanted to make this amazing. I think it's decent, but I really wish I could have had some really good video knowledge or editing knowledge to make this really just stand out. But I hope that you guys really took something from this. share it amongst the community. Hopefully they'll take something from this as well, and just let me know your thoughts. I'll leave timestamps in the descriptions below so that you guys can for sure navigate to places whenever you need to. And that'll be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really hope that you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.